So I've made quite a few videos about AI and all the negative ways in which this technology has impacted society due to the way AI companies are being greedy and hoarding RAM and not thinking about consumers, causing consumer electronics to skyrocket in price as all of that causes, DRAM shortage and shortage of computing components, combined with the way the technology is often being misused rather than being implemented in ways that genuinely benefit society. Now, when it comes to the shortage of consumer electronics parts, that all stems from OpenAI specifically, the way they made a deal with both Samsung and SK Hynix to the point where as of 2025, late 2025, they consumed, or they're projected to consume, up to 40% of global DRAM output, and that caused a mass panic amongst other corporations as well as consumers that has led to everyone essentially hoarding RAM. And so if there's one company people wish to see a downfall for, it is very much OpenAI. We're seeing projections from companies like Micron, the third biggest maker of RAM, who recently exited the consumer business entirely, with companies like these projecting that DRAM drought and shortage could last until at least 2028. So for consumers who, are enthusiasts of PC and of electronics and just the general masses who buy electronics that feature any semblance of RAM or memory are about to get fucked for quite a few years to come. We're already starting to see this whole situation bleeding to other countries, with Germany reporting that DDR5 RAM prices have increased by 4.4 times since July of 2025, with DDR3 memory also rising in prices. And if more recent reports are to be believed, the amount of RAM that will be dedicated to AI data centers is much higher than you might think. With a recent report from the Wall Street Journal, whose information was summarized by tomshardware.com here, suggesting that data centers will consume 70% of memory chips made in 2026. Supply shortfall will cause the chip shortage to spread to other segments. And that's the thing. In this day and age, everything is a smart device of some sort. Everything is a bit of a computer here and there. So, for example, cars now have computers in them. TVs now have computers in them. Just general consumer electronics, as well as, like Bluetooth speakers, set-top boxes, and even smart appliances like fridges. All of them will go up in price because of this memory shortage and inflation. So thanks for that, OpenAI. And so all this ultimately originated from corporate greed, with OpenAI in particular kickstarting this domino effect. And so a lot of people are essentially cursing OpenAI and wishing the worst for this company. And for those folks, the good news is that OpenAI is currently not looking so hot when it comes to the near-term future and their ability to afford the infrastructure that they're trying to build with data centers that require a ton of expenditures to be able to set up due to the price of electronics and the volume of electronics components required to make OpenAI's vision possible, which is why you're starting to see articles like this one right here from the New York Times, published on January 13th, 2026, titled, "This is what convinced me OpenAI will run out of money." Now, that being a paywalled article, I'm going to instead show this article right here that's more accessible, that summarizes that report from tomshardware.com, whose headline reads, "OpenAI could reportedly run out of cash by mid-2027. Analyst paints grim picture after examining the company's finances." So here's what that report discovered looking into OpenAI's finances. More specifically, what this New York Times analyst and columnist predicts is that OpenAI may very well be destitute in 18 months in the wake of its AI endeavors. And part of this actually comes from a research and report from last year, from 2025, that highlighted how OpenAI was projected to burn through $8 billion in 2025, rising to $40 billion in 2028. So yeah, maintaining AI and then further building out its infrastructure is going to get more and more expensive as the years go by. And it's a matter of, will the company make enough money to be able to afford this situation? Prospects are not looking good, given that the company reportedly predicts profitability by 2030. When you look at it that way, it's not hard to do the math that this is woefully unsustainable. There are questions as to whether OpenAI can hold out on losing this much money and continuously losing more and more money every year until 2030, which is 4 years from now. Setting up this AI infrastructure is so expensive that for CEO Sam Altman, for OpenAI as a company, this is a venture and a project that will result in spending of roughly $1.4 trillion on data centers. $1.4 trillion with a T. This article also summarizes how another entity who did some analysis reported last year that even with the best outlook, even if we consider the best case scenario of OpenAI's potential for revenue, there's apparently going to be at least an $800 billion black hole in the industry. You can find this report on Bain.com right here, published on September 23rd, 2025. The headline reads, "How can we meet AI's insatiable demand for compute power?" And some of the headlines here, some of the bullet points that spotlight the main points of this article include AI's computational needs are growing more than twice as fast as Moore's law, pushing toward 100 gigawatts of new demand in the US by 2030. Meeting this demand could require $500 billion in annual spending on new data centers. But even an aggressive reinvestment of IT and AI savings leaves a big gap. Technological and algorithmic breakthroughs could help, but supply chain shortages or insufficient power supply could also thwart progress. More and more, it's sounding like there was this gold rush, but they really didn't think through the logistics of making this gold rush possible. It is further highlighted in this report that in order for all of this to be viable, these companies would have to make $2 trillion in annual revenue, which is just not possible, even when this article presents the best case scenario of all of the ways in which you could potentially save and, kind of maximize revenue. They still insist that the amount would still fall $800 billion short of the revenue needed to fund the full investment, that $2 trillion a year figure. The gigawatts of power required to make AI viable due to the fact that Moore's law is slowing down will potentially mean that, according to predictions, that by 2030, we could be looking at AI compute footprint hitting 200 gigawatts. That this is a technology that will just not be viable due to the fact that it requires massive, borderline inconceivable upgrades to local grids, years-long lead times on electrical gear, and thousands of tons of high-end cooling. There are other entities who have also been highlighting how OpenAI is in serious financial trouble and how not viable this endeavor currently is. So right here we have an article from October 23rd, 2025, published by Will Lockett, who's an independent journalist covering global politics, climate change, and technology. And this is one that kind of fell by the wayside, but it's something that people are digging up now because it highlights all of the major red flags that people are spotting, especially when it comes to the way OpenAI is operating, but just this whole AI gold rush in general, the amount of money that needs to be spent, the amount of revenue that needs to happen, the amount of infrastructure that needs to be set up for the amount of power that this thing consumes, so on and so forth. Just the inviability of it is kind of becoming more and more apparent. This individual's insight talks about how when the AI bubble pops, it will crash our economy, that there is indeed this bubble that currently is looking like it's ready to pop. And the data presented in these three paragraphs in particular paint a rather grim picture for OpenAI, which a lot of people see as a positive thing. So it reads right here, earlier this year, the information analyzed OpenAI's predictions and found that they were on track to post a $14 billion loss in 2026. This was on the heels of OpenAI nearly going bankrupt and experiencing a $6 billion investor bailout at the end of 2024. So needless to say, if losses grew to that level, OpenAI would be seen as a doomed venture. Well, recently, The Information posted another report on OpenAI and found that in the first half of this year, they made $4.3 billion in revenue, but in terms of losses, we're looking at $13.5 billion. That is very much in the red. So in the first half of this year, OpenAI lost as much money as they were predicted to lose for the entirety of next year. It was predicted that OpenAI's losses would be as much as $14 billion in 2026. But as it turns out, even in the first half of 2025, they managed to lose close to that, $13.5 billion. So that means that in 2026, that $14 billion loss estimate is incredibly conservative. This report continues right here that this means that OpenAI is losing about 3 times more money than it's earning and is on track to post a $27 billion net loss by the end of the year rather than $14 billion. Or to put it another way, OpenAI's 2025 revenue is on track to only be $3.1 billion more than last year, while its annual operational costs are set to be $24.1 billion more than last year. So for every dollar of revenue growth OpenAI has, it is costing them $7.77. For every dollar they make, they're losing $7.77. That's not a viable business. So yeah, it's bad. It's real bad. And with OpenAI specifically, it's not a company like, say, Microsoft, who make revenue off of a lot of other things that generate a ton of revenue for them. OpenAI is banking all of their eggs in the AI basket. Whereas other companies like, Microsoft and Amazon are trying to diversify and really put a lot of eggs in the AI basket, but not all of their eggs are in that sector. So OpenAI in particular is in a lot of trouble. And at the same time, companies like Microsoft and Amazon have to deal with similar, financial situations and infrastructure outlooks that could be a huge detriment to their ambitions. It could very well be that their ambitions are far too big to realize at the present moment due to just everything going on with the cost of running AI, setting up AI, as well as just infrastructural aspects that are not currently in place. Right now, the ambitions surrounding AI are far outreaching financial and realistic capabilities. And while we're on the topic of Microsoft, it's worth highlighting that Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella recently talked about AI at this forum, and he talked about how an AI bubble can be something that becomes a reality if there isn't enough adoption of it. He said, for this not to be a bubble by definition, it requires that the benefits of this are much more evenly spread. Pointing to the fact that AI can't just benefit a few tech groups, it has to benefit as wide range of individuals and companies as possible. Apparently, he noted that a telltale sign of if it's a bubble would be if only tech groups were benefiting from the rise of AI rather than companies in other sectors. Though, of course, Satya Nadella tries to paint a positive picture, stating that he's much more confident that this is a technology that will, in fact, build on the rails of cloud and mobile, diffuse faster, bend the productivity curve, and bring local surplus in economic growth all around the world. I do think, realistically speaking, AI as a technology is here to stay. But the current model, the current utilizations, the way AI is kind of more for corporate greed right now rather than the benefit of society, all of that is painting a really bad picture on artificial intelligence, and it's making the technology's implementation not entirely viable and not something that's garnering the level of adoption, the level of acceptance that these companies would like. And that goes doubly true with all of the negative ways in which AI has impacted society. It feels like there are more negatives than pluses right now with the way the economy is being fucked by AI, with the way deepfakes and misinformation is becoming widespread, with the way people and artists are being replaced, their artwork being stolen, with quality outputs that are far below par. The word slop gets thrown around a lot, but it does for good reason, because so much of AI right now is kind of like pre-alpha garbage that does output slop and whose tools are being utilized in nefarious ways that take advantage of people rather than benefit them. It's the reason why the general kind of vibe surrounding it is really skeptical in terms of, the ability for such a powerful technology to be utilized properly and, ethically. When companies are so greedy that they're willing to tank the economy of consumer electronics just for the sake of, being first to the race so they can make the most money, that benefiting society isn't the first thing on their mind. It's just being the first to something so they can be rich, so they can be the first to that gold mine. Yeah, the general reception surrounding OpenAI losing a ton of money very rapidly and this currently not being financially viable for them has been celebration. Tweets like these reporting on this are going viral. I mean, this one right here from Puberty right here has a whopping 21.5 million views, tens of thousands of likes, tons of people engaging and wishing OpenAI an ill fate. That becomes especially apparent if you look at quote tweets, and you can see tons of people are incredibly happy to hear that OpenAI is suffering. All of the, memes and all of the GIFs and all of the responses that highlight how pleased people are that OpenAI is kind of essentially getting a taste of its own medicine, being financially fucked. And then beyond the stigmatization of companies like OpenAI and, the negative uses of AI as a technology, the more exploitative uses rather than the beneficial uses, you've also got the fact that there are recent reports suggesting that people speaking out against AI and protesting AI has led to AI companies losing a lot of money. So right here we have this report from More Perfect Union from January 6, 2026 that reads, $98 billion in planned AI data center development was derailed in a single quarter last year by community organizing and pushback, according to Data Center Watch, more than all disruptions tracked since 2023. So not only is AI becoming more and more expensive for companies to build and maintain, they're also seeing more and more backlash as proving to be genuinely disruptive to AI companies. You can go to Data Center Watch yourself and check out this map that talks about a 125% surge in data center opposition. And it kind of highlights a map of the US and showing all of the activist groups and petitions and whatnot that have spread across the nation against AI and its current implementation, its current usage, the kind of greedy way in which this technology is being pursued and being implemented. The TLDR here reads, opposition to data centers is accelerating. In Q2 of 2025 alone, an estimated $98 billion in projects were blocked or delayed, more than the total for all previous quarters since 2023. As political resistance builds and local organizing becomes more coordinated, this is now a sustained and intensifying trend. And so people are not just sitting down and just letting companies spoon feed them agenda bullshit. They're actually looking at things objectively and really understanding the negative impacts that the way companies are pursuing AI is having on society and doing something about it. And then on top of all that, you've got external factors that will impact the expenses surrounding building and maintaining AI. This report right here from WCCF Tech highlighting how memory manufacturers now have a new threat looming over their heads, as failing to produce in the US could trigger a whopping 100% tariff. Manufacturing is often done overseas because labor is cheap, but the current administration is insisting that everything gets made in the US, which is just not viable. And as that insistence continues, that could be hugely detrimental to memory manufacturers and in turn AI data centers, but also this will end up fucking over consumers as well. Just by proxy, because all this will ultimately just further bolster and inflate prices of components like RAM. US restrictions are also impacting companies like Nvidia due to export restrictions on advanced chips combined with rapid progress from domestic players like Huawei, Cambricon, and more threats who are enabling local suppliers to meet roughly 80% of demand. Nvidia is becoming less important for countries like China, which is a huge market, with predictions saying that its market share will drop from 66% to 8% in 2026. These are, potential possibilities, nothing official on this actually taking place. But yeah, a lot of hurdles that AI companies are facing, from the fact that the cost of building and maintaining AI exceeds the amount of revenue that they can make from this, and the level of adoption and the pace of adoption that we're seeing from AI, combined with the fact that public outcry has been vast and is continuously spreading because people are starting to see that the more nefarious implementations of AI, which is more commonplace than the beneficial implementations, are not something to ignore if we, as a society, want to make sure that powerful tools and technologies like these are used properly, and that it's not just used for the top 1% of individuals and companies, but rather are implemented in ways that are ethical and in ways that are regulated. But then you've got all of these external factors like, the current administration of the US's restrictions with overseas manufacturing and exporting and stuff like that. That's further causing problems. So yeah, if you were in the camp of I want to see OpenAI crash and burn, right now, things are not looking good for OpenAI. Future prospects are really looking incredibly poor. It's not looking like this is financially viable. It's looking like they're bleeding money like you wouldn't believe, and that they're going to run dry in the not so distant future. And when that happens, if the adoption of AI doesn't proliferate at the level that these companies want, then yeah, all this investment into this technology will ultimately result in a bubble popping and the economy crashing. That's one man's take. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.